Hey guys, I'm Sam and I'm unhinged. I'm unhinged and I'm unwell because I read Dark Heir, the highly anticipated sequel to Dark Rise by C.S. Pacat. And I briefly talk about this book in my gay fantasy romance video, so if you haven't seen that one, check it out. But we're about to do a deep dive into it because the sequel got me fucked up. I was desperate to get my grubby little rat paws on Dark Heir. I was so desperate that I accidentally pre-ordered it twice because I needed to make sure that I had it immediately as soon as it was available. And I devoured this book. I read it in 2 days, nonstop. All I did was read it. And as I sat devouring this, I just became progressively more insane. So before I can get into a review of this book, I really need to lay out exactly what we're talking about here, because this book gets kind of complicated. So to start off, we have Will, who's the main character. He's working on the docks and he's sort of on the run. We don't know initially what the situation is, but we kind of come to realize that a group of bad guys killed his mother and now they're after him. And he doesn't even necessarily know why his mother was killed or why people are chasing him. So that's where he's starting off. And he finds out that his mother was a descendant of the lady, who is like the champion for all things good and light in this ancient world that has long been forgotten. And in this ancient world, there was this ultimate evil guy who was the Dark King. And the Dark King's the ultimate bad guy. He's like the worst dude ever. And the lady was the only one who was able to defeat him. There's a group that is a group basically of the Dark King's descendants and their followers that want to bring back the Dark King. The Dark King was powerful enough that he was able to make it so that he would be born again after he was killed, so that he could just come back thousands of years later and get back to what he was doing, conquering the world. So that's sort of like what Will learns. He learns that his mother was a descendant of the lady, and when there's this group that's trying to bring back the Dark King, the lady and her descendants are really like the first line of defense, I guess, like the only ones who can truly stop the Dark King from coming back. Him and his new friend Violet end up staying with the stewards, who are very like rigid and very like classic, you know, they're almost like monks or like paladins, you know, classic, righteous, do-gooder type people. And they do everything, you know, very by the book. And when he like kind of comes into their world, they live this very like old school, old world lifestyle. And they bring him in thinking he's gonna be like the savior, you know? They think, oh my God, he's the blood of the lady. He's gonna be the one. He's gonna be that girl to really just make sure that the Dark King never comes back and that darkness is defeated. There's also a character named James, who's very important. James is sort of like working with the bad guys who are on the side of bringing the Dark King back. And he is what's called a reborn, which is basically what they're trying to do with the Dark King. He was reborn into this timeline, but he was originally alive in the Dark King and the lady's time, and he was like a champion for the light, but the Dark King corrupted him and put this collar on him and made it so that he had to do like everything that the Dark King wanted in this past life. Of course, James has no memory of that past life, but he is that person reborn, and he has these crazy powers. And so he's hanging out with the bad guy. He's super powerful. And so he's kind of like initially a villain in this story. And everybody calls him the betrayer because he has this whole legacy of this person that he was reborn from, who, you know, like he literally doesn't even remember. Like that's the thing. He does not remember his past life, but he's just like embracing it for whatever it can give him to help him survive right now. So you got that going on. You got Will, who's like learning about the stewards, about being good and being righteous. And every time he kind of has like run-ins with James, there's like this sexual tension where it's kind of like, I don't know, they're enemies, but like there's a vibe. You know, there's like a vibe there where James is like, who is he? Oh my God. Like, this boy, you know? So there's definitely like, you see that there's some kind of like enemies to lovers kind of romance brewing. And that's about as far as I can get without spoiling anything. So now we're getting into the spoilers, guys, okay? It's gonna be spoilers for the rest of the video. So if you don't want spoilers, this is the time to click off the video, because I literally don't even know how to talk about the rest of the series without giving spoilers. So basically the book, it's about this, you know, it's a very typical good versus evil kind of story. But as the story goes on, small things about Will sort of start being uncovered, where by the end of the book, we realize that Will is not who he has been believed to be by the stewards. And even Will doesn't necessarily know who he really is, but he kind of is getting the feeling that as much as he'd like to be this blood of the lady, hero of the light person, he is like realizing, yeah, that's not who I am. And that's where we really get into it, because it turns out that the Dark King already has been reborn. And it's Will. Will's the Dark King. Oops. And so, yeah, of course, him and James have this tension because in a past life, you know, they were getting it on. So I love a typical classic chosen one narrative. You know, I get into it, I eat it up. But this is not that. This book like kind of tricks you into starting off making you think that that's what it is, and then completely subverting your expectations. It totally subverts your expectations about what good and evil even is, because Will is the main character and he's arguably like the most righteous character in the story. But yet, in his past life, he was the Dark King. And like James, he has no memory of that past life. But as he starts kind of coming into like what his magic is and how he fits into this world, it's getting to the point where it's like it can't be denied. As much as he doesn't want to believe it, that's who he is. The whole concept of Will being the Dark King, oh baby, we really get into it in Dark Heir. Dark Heir is all about his turmoil of resenting his identity, of not wanting to be the bad guy. He does not want to be this evil figure that everyone hates, but he is. And he doesn't want to be dark and evil, but there is, even though he is really a good person and a good character who is always trying to do the best to help others and make situations better for other people, he does still have that like a little bit of edge, a little bit of darkness to him. And as his relationship with James develops, oh my God, how do I even begin? So I mentioned earlier that there's this collar that the Dark King whose name is Sarsian, and then the betrayer, who was James' past self, is Anharion, I believe. I don't exactly know how to say that, so I'm going to mispronounce those. But basically, the Dark King put this collar on the betrayer that makes it so that he has to do everything the Dark King wants. And so James, in his life, has been haunted by the existence of this collar that everybody's saying, like, ooh, if somebody finds that collar and puts it on James, then they can control him and make him do whatever they want. And so James has lived his whole life sort of in fear of the Dark King, of really anyone finding this collar, but especially not the Dark King. And because he doesn't want to be controlled, he wants to be able to like live his own life and be himself. In Dark Rise, Will finds the collar before James does. And they're still enemies at this point. So James is like, fuck, he's gonna put that collar on me and control me for the side of the light, for the good side. And Will, instead of doing that, gives James the collar and is like, I'm not gonna try to take away your free will. So James is like suddenly free for the first time in his life, where he has access to the collar now and he doesn't have to worry about someone else putting it on him. And so he's like really like obsessed with Will for that. This is a quote from James in Dark Rise that haunts me. Haunting. He says to Will at the end of Dark Rise, after Will has figured out that he's the Dark King Reborn, and he's the only one who knows that he's the Dark King Reborn. Nobody else knows that. James comes to him and basically is like, I want to follow you. And he says, my whole life, all anyone's ever wanted to do was possess me. The only one who ever set me free was you. And then Will, who knows he was the Dark King, is like, Dark Rise ends on that note. And I read Dark Rise when it first came out. Mistake. Because then I was like, oh my God, I have to know what happens next. I have to know what happens between Will and James. I have to know like how other people react to him finding out that he's the Dark King, you know? Like I have to know what's gonna happen. So I waited 2 years. I waited 2 years for this to come out. And this is where I become Boo Boo the Fool. Because yes, I read it immediately, but if Dark Rise, the first book in the trilogy, ended on a note that makes you desperate for the next one, what do you think the second book is gonna end on? I'm like putting on my clown nose. Did you not know? Like, did you not know that this was gonna end on a cliffhanger? Did you not know that? Getting into what happens in Dark Heir, it's all about the turmoil. It's all about the turmoil that Will is going through because he wants to be a good person and he wants his friends to like him. He's terrified of his friends finding out that he's the Dark King because he knows if they knew, they would not want anything to do with him because the Dark King's the bad guy. And even if Will's not a bad guy, just having that association would make all his friends turn on him. And he knows that. So he's dealing with this turmoil while also dealing with these bad guys who are descendants of the Dark King. And their whole thing is that they want to bring the Dark King back, but they have no idea that it already happened and that Will is the Dark King. So they don't even know what they're dealing with. And so Will is like facing off against these people who are claiming that they're fighting for him. And then he's got all his friends who are just like, we're on the light side, evil is bad. And this is where we really get into it. Because in the first book, we learn that the stewards may seem like a picture of righteousness, but they're not. They're not. They're not as good as they seem to be. There's a darkness inside them. How do I even explain this? I'm just going to leave it at that. There's a darkness inside them. And so then in the next book, in Dark Heir, we're really exploring the relationships between, okay, so everyone who's on the light side is supposed to be pure and good, but they're not that good. And then everyone who's on the dark side really isn't that bad, especially Will, who's like literally our protagonist and the best character in the whole thing. So bad people aren't actually that bad. Good people aren't actually that good. And we actually get flashbacks too. Will kind of ends up seeing some flashbacks of like his past life as Sarsian, the Dark King. And in those flashbacks, we actually see the lady. And it's very clear in the flashbacks that the lady is not this like glowing savior type person that she's been made out to be through history. And the Dark King, I mean, the Dark King, listen, he's the Dark King. He's a bad guy. But, like, he slays, okay? Like, yeah, okay, he killed some people. But he slays, all right? And the thing that is really cool about all of this is that it's basically just a metaphor for kind of like being queer, you know? That C.S. Pacat has described this series as being about reclaiming the queer villain, because so often villains are queer coded. Queer people identify more with villains because they know what it's like to be like misunderstood and sort of like rejected by society, you know? And so this book is really kind of like taking that concept of like the queer villain and turning it into something that you've never seen before. Pacat's doing it like nobody's ever done it. Playing the game so that it can never be played the same way again. That's what's going on here. For one thing, you're getting Will's internal struggle of like not wanting to show who he really is to his friends. He's terrified they're gonna reject him. That's a whole metaphor right there, very obviously, for coming out as gay. You know, that so many people, especially where I come from in Oklahoma, so many people, you know, are afraid that they can't be their true selves because if they come out as gay, they'll be rejected by the people that they love the most. And it happens all the time, and that's what Will is going through. He's afraid of losing everyone that he loves by revealing his true identity. And he doesn't want to be evil. He doesn't want to do bad things. He's not a bad person. But he is the reborn Dark King. And he knows that people are never going to accept that about him. So that's the ongoing turmoil in the story. And that's what makes me feral, because just like the themes, reclaiming the queer villain, kind of saying like what is good and evil, that nobody's really all the way good or all the way evil. A lot of times in like fantasy and fiction, we have this like very clear, like black and white, like good and evil. But it's not like that. More people tend to be kind of in these gray areas where they're doing what they think is the best thing, but maybe isn't, you know? And so we see more gray area and nuance and like kind of breaking down these like archetypes of good and evil, and then really exploring like, okay, y'all, we've been rooting for the queer villain and you never see him win. Maybe this is the time that you see him win, you know? Like, that's kind of what you want to see with this. And especially with Will and James. James has no idea that Will is the Dark King throughout their entire, like, budding romance. And just, like, there's so much yearning. Which, that's what I love about YA. Because Pacat's a freak, okay? You know, Pacat's kinky. Like, if you've ever heard of a series called Captive Prince, you know that Pacat likes to get kinky, and this is YA. So we can't get too kinky. It's more just like yearning. But, you know, Pacat's like, hey, I'm still gonna be horny. Like, trust and believe, I'm still gonna be horny. That's why the collar thing's in there. I mean, come on. That's kinky. But, like, back to what I was saying, you know, that you have this relationship with like Will and James that's developing, and you know, it's like, what is gonna happen with that? You really, like, when I was reading it, I desperately wanted Will to just tell James that he was the Dark King, or to have James find out, because I wanted to see James learn but accept him. And that's when we get to the end. That's when we get to the end of the book. Okay, that's when we get to the end, because in the end, no matter how hard Will has tried to keep this secret, it does end up getting revealed at the end of Dark Heir to everyone that Will is the Dark King. And yeah, his friends start turning against him immediately. Immediately. But James, oh my God, James is the only one who's really coming to his rescue. The whole time throughout this book, James has been holding on to that collar, okay? Because he's like, where am I going to go hide it? Like, the only place where I can make sure I know where it is and no one's getting it is if I have it on me. And he tells Will that. And Will's like, don't tell me that. I don't want to know where it is. Because Will doesn't want to, like, do the nasty shit that he did in his past life. And James is like, Will, if anybody's gonna put this collar on me, I want it to be you. And Will's like, don't even joke about that. Like, that's not funny, okay? We're not even gonna talk about that. Because Will's fighting with everything that he has, not to be his past self. One of the villain characters who is a descendant of the Dark King that is responsible for killing Will's mother, who Will is actually after, and is also sort of has been or was in the past a father figure to James. This guy, fucking St.Clair over here, he finds James and he's like, James, I know you got that collar because I know you. And he's like, James, you're fighting for the good side now? Well, not anymore. I'm gonna put the collar on you and then you're gonna do what I want. So James is like, no, oh my God, no. St.Clair, bad guy, puts the collar on James, thinking that it'll make it so that James has to do everything that St.Clair wants. But as soon as that collar gets on James, he's like, oh, no. He realizes as soon as it's on that the way that this magic works is the Dark King would never create something that would allow someone else to control his favorite person, his lover. So really the way the collar works is that once it's on James, only the Dark King can tell him what to do. Not any old loser guy, okay? It's only the Dark King. So there have been misconceptions about what people thought the collar even did. And that's where it gets juicier. So Will is having all his friends turn against him because they're realizing that he's the Dark King and they're like, ew, yeah, we hate you. And Will's like, man, this is exactly what I was trying to avoid. James comes to his rescue, saves him, gets him out of that situation, and Will's like, oh my God, I thought you would hate me if you knew who I really was. And James is like, no. And Will's like, oh my God, say you don't hate me. And James is like, I don't hate you. And Will's over here thinking, oh my God, here's the one person that is gonna accept me for who I really am. The one person who's actually gonna accept me and not see me as this villain. Finally, somebody sees me for who I am right now, currently, and not seeing the Dark King. He just wants to be accepted. That's all he wants. And he thinks he has that with James. And then they start kissing because Will's like, oh my God, I love you. He sees when they're kissing that James has the collar on him. And Will throws up. He's like, oh my God, because this just ruined everything. He thought that there was finally somebody who actually accepted him, but the way it looks to Will is that James is only doing these things because he now has this collar on and is being controlled. And when Will had been like, oh, tell me you don't hate me, and James was like, I don't hate you, that then it looks like, he's only saying it because Will told him to, because he has the collar on. And so Will's fucked up. And so am I reading this. So are we all. We're all fucked up reading this. Will is like, oh my God, I'm not the Dark King. That's not me. I don't want what he wants. I don't want to do what he wants to do. And James is like, you are him. And Will's like, oh my God, do you have your memories from your past life now? And James is like, sorry, Cian, I remember everything. End of book. And then it ends. And then it ends. And then it ends. It ends there. And so you're left being like, what's going on? You're like, is James like mindlessly under the control of this collar? Or is it not what we expected? Because so far, and what I personally believe is that so far, based on everything that we've seen, don't expect anything. You know, don't expect anything to go the way you expected it to go, because this whole series is about subverting our expectations and showing you that what you thought you knew isn't what you knew. So I don't think that James has become this like mindless, controlled kind of robot person, but we don't actually know what happened because the book ends. Hey, it took 2 years for Dark Heir to come out, which means if we're like going by time and how things have gone, the next book, the third book in the series, isn't gonna come out probably until 2025. I will be 28 when this book comes out. I will be almost 30 when this book comes out, okay? I'm supposed to wait 2 years? Sarsian, I remember everything. I'm supposed to wait 2 years after that? Are you fucking kidding me? Are you fucking kidding me, dude? So now you see why I'm completely unhinged. And all I've been doing, I joined 2 discords, 2 Dark Heir discords that are just people talking about their thoughts about the books. I don't do stuff like that. I'm not social. So like, I'm thirsting for information, for theories, for ideas about what people think is gonna happen next. And everybody's got a different idea. The one thing that I think is that the collar somehow unlocks James's memories from his past life as Anharion, or however you say that. I feel like I'm not saying it right. But his past life, you know, I feel like it unlocked his memories, but there it hints several times in the book that, okay, let me just get in here. Because it hints several times that, like, I don't think the collar really controls him the way people think. We already found out, okay? We already found out that it's not what people thought, that you just put the collar on him and then he'll do whatever you want. No, he only does whatever the Dark King wants once he gets that baby on. So already, that's not what people have been saying in the story. So that's already different from what people thought, all right? It's indicated at multiple points that Anharion willingly surrendered himself to the Dark King. And people are like, well, of course he did if he was like mind controlled by this collar. But I'm like, Anharion and James have these crazy telekinetic powers that make him super powerful. So could he really have been controlled if he didn't want to be controlled? Okay, literally, I'm just supposed to sit here and wait 2 years? 2 years? To figure out what happens next, to figure out what happens with James and Will, to figure out what happens with the collar. So, in summary, what I loved about this series is, like I said, it's the subverting of tropes. The good versus evil. What is good? What is evil? Is anyone really truly good or evil? What does it mean to be a bad guy? Reclaiming the queer villain, showing, you know, this like metaphor of what it's like to be queer and to be afraid of coming out and showing people who you are. All of these things that this book covers are just done so expertly. Like the way that Pacat sort of discusses these themes and shows them, nobody else is doing it like this. It's genius. I read the book and I was like, who could even ever? So that's my take on these books. Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe. Every subscription counts towards one day less that I have to wait for the next book to come out. So subscribe. Subscribe, guys.